All right, we're going to get started here this afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar on how to integrate AI into your software startup product strategy. I'll be your event host. My name is Mike Vetter. I'll be introducing today's topic and speakers. I'm a co-founder of Wildfire Labs, who is putting on this webinar. We are an accelerator that helps founders take an idea, shape that idea into a software product, and then a software product to revenue. We specialize in helping companies build AI into their product strategy and helping founders make that transition. So today we'll be covering a practical framework for aligning your product with AI, and we'll also be talking with a real-world example in Chris, who is leading a company that is going through this transition right now. So before we get into today's topic and presenters, I just wanted to cover a couple webinar items. So first, you'll be on mute for the duration of the presentation, but we will be opening up your mics to ask questions at the end of the presentation. However, if you do have questions, there's a little Q&A button at the top of today's webinar, and you can ask a question. I'll be monitoring questions, and then at the end of our webinar, we will be answering those questions with our presenters. So another thing, just housekeeping item, is if you are unable to make the entire presentation today, don't worry. It will be recorded, and you can find this event in our Startup Tales from the Treehouse podcast, and you can subscribe to our podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my event co-host today, Todd Gagne. So Todd, thank you for leading this today. I'll let you take it away from here.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. And like to welcome Chris Grebisz to the podcast. Chris is the CIO of a company called We Localize. Chris and I have known each other a long time. I don't know, 27, 28 years.
98 or something around
somewhere
there.
In there. Yeah. So it's been a bit. And honestly, Chris, I guess, welcome, and I appreciate you taking the time. I guess one of the things I guess I would say that kind of precipitated this was you and I have had a number of conversations over the last 2 years in particular around AI and just basically how it's, shaping not only your business, about what we're doing as well. And so I've always really valued your opinion and how you think about things. And so I think hopefully this is a good dialogue on some of the journey that you and I have been on together, as well as kind of what you've been doing with We Localize. So welcome to the podcast. I appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
So why don't we start with your background? You've been in kind of the localization space for most of your career. So maybe why don't you talk a little bit about just your journey through that, either GSSI to We Localize, and just the scale that you've ended up having to go from something that was a pretty small startup that you started yourself to kind of where you're at today.
Sure. Yeah, I think it was 97 or 98, so dating myself, that started GSSI. And at that time, there was, and I'd been in localization for a year prior to that, so I was still quite young. But I saw an opportunity starting to develop around the internet and e-commerce in particular. And so founded a company that really focused on globalizing e-commerce environments back in the day, with the B2B environments, metal sites, companies that are starting to transact. And that was really great. I mean, we grew like a weed until we didn't. And it kind of imploded in the early 2000s. We scrambled around. We ended up merging with We Localize, which was primarily not a tech services, global tech services, translation services company. And we put two small struggling companies together to make a small company that struggled a little bit less. But today it's 1,500 employees, over 300 million in top line revenue, and it has seen very good periods of growth, riding sort of the wave of global digital content. And we are a language services company, but we process, I think, 4 billion words a year, and so it's heavily tech enabled, and it's been interesting.
Yeah, and maybe the backdrop to that, Chris, is a little bit just, I mean, you and I are about the same age, but we've kind of gone through a series of just different technology epochs, right? I mean, it's like when we were younger, I think we both can remember when we first got our hands on computers and kind of what we were doing. And then as you're talking about professionally, the internet came along and really changed our perspective and the opportunities that we had. And then again, mobile, right? Mobile changed it. And now I feel like we're not to another epoch where it's like AI is really kind of starting to stress a lot of the business models, and yours in particular too, and how we're changing and thinking about it. And so to me, that's pretty interesting for the time that we've been alive. That's a lot of technology change, and digesting each one of those has met pretty seismic changes in business.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like I definitely, have thought about that a lot, because I remember getting the first email in the early 90s. I remember seeing the first HTTP page, and I like, at the time you're like, wow, this is super cool. Don't know what it's going to be, but it's it's going to change things. And that's exactly, in November of 18 months ago, seeing the first ChatGPT and starting to engage in it in that November, I had that same sort of revelation as when I was 20 years old. It was like, and in our business, it was in the first 12 months when ChatGPT came out, and I was doing a certain amount of playing in pots to get people's attention on this, because it was looked at a little bit like as a circus act. But it's a large language model, and we're in the language services industry, so there's going to be an intersection at some point. And the language, and it wasn't entirely new to language services. The language services has been using machine translation, which is a AI technology, neural machine translation, for a long time. This is different though, and it's different because it's accessible. It's because CEOs are using it on a daily basis. They're talking to, their Spanish relatives, and now it's like communication is not protected. It's not in a dark room somewhere. It's like I can communicate with anybody in the world in a reasonably good way. That's going to affect our business, and is affecting our business.
Well, maybe before we get to the business side of it, I'm curious. I mean, even you and I have just talking about new revelation, new applications to just chat. I think, early on, you're playing with it. You're trying to find all these different avenues. And you had some kind of creative ones that maybe are kind of unique. So maybe walk through 2 or 3 of your areas that you found some value in this that maybe is more personal to you than the business side of it.
So, like, when 4.0 came out, it's a really good language, taking language lessons. So I do a morning walk pretty religiously, and I'll do a few Spanish lessons, and I'll ask Juniper, and I'll say, I want to learn some new verbs today. And we'll go through, and just as I'm walking along our neighborhood, which is like pretty cool, right? It's like,
that is pretty cool.
And, as soon as when I started playing with that, also, I owned a little bit of Duolingo stock, and I sold it really fast. It's like, the other thing, actually, this is a little geeky, but food recipes. Yeah, and and I want, healthy recipes that I can do fairly quick. I actually made a little GPT for this, and and so that I could identify, inside of certain criteria, certain recipes and menus for the week. Those are interesting in business, OCRing receipts, and you could save it out in a CSV that includes all the data that I can import into Concur. So there's it's like the interesting change management and societal is like I've embraced it. So I think anything I'm doing, any type of task I'm doing, I think, okay, how can I use ChatGPT to help me? That hasn't set in, and it's even like you have bantering conversations and with amongst, people and groups and over drinks, and it's always like, let me Google that for you. Even search sometimes doesn't set in with certain people, and this is an even a bigger step. And so anytime I'm looking at a laborious task, or just want to have fun, I'll go to ChatGPT and start screwing around with stuff.
One that's kind of happened just recently was we're planning on going to Germany for vacation, and one of our partners, the one you was introduced to you, him and his wife are originally from Germany, and so they gave us a whole bunch of things to do in the region, and so we were like, hey, this is great. I have no idea exactly where they are in kind of context, and is this a museum? Is this a town? Is there something else? And so I just threw it all in and said, here's what I'm trying to do from a timing standpoint. Here's the types of things we like. Build me an itinerary. And the first draft of it was very good. And it was better than it would have done. But I told it where I was going to be staying, where I was going to be ending, how long I wanted to drive. I like to hike, all these types of things. And it was able to kind of grok that information and put it into an itinerary. Here's morning, noon, and at evening, what you should be looking at doing. And I was like, that's pretty cool.
It's like now it's getting to a point of maturity where I didn't actually fully believe in digital assistants because like Siri and Alexa, they just weren't that good, and they were very, very awkward. But now with the more recent evolutions, I can actually see how I would really I could utilize a digital assistant because it's just so natural.
Yep, it is. So let's pivot a little bit to kind of we localize and go back to the 18 months ago where basically you saw this. You started to talk to some of your customers, and you started to maybe the sphincter got a little tighter. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. It was one of those. Well, the other thing that happened 18 months ago is I reread Clay Christensen because incumbents and we were an incumbent inside of an industry, and it's like needed to reread in terms of what the dangers were in front of us, which they still are. We are language services company, and these models, even though there's NMT out there and there's been machine translation, it was more of the accessibility of this technology is going to accelerate the application and utilization of MT, and in particularly companies that are building global content. And what I think is going to happen and is happening, and this has led to some other business decisions, is that a marketer can produce their own content comfortably in maybe 10 or 15 different languages, or a product manager can produce UI. They don't rely upon necessarily a whole big bureaucracy to do that exists in bigger companies. So we really looked at that in the strategy with the business and where we take the business. We embraced it. We absolutely said to ourselves, from our investors down, we have to embrace this. We have to be a disrupting incumbent. And so we also then took hard looks at where can we use this internally as well, trying to change of our staff. The more that our team around the world embraces this, that's going to drive innovation inside of the company, both for services and solutions that we're delivering, as well as for internal applications. And we had meetings. We set up some idea labs of trying to generate ideas from different people and different use cases. And in the last 18 months, I think we've done a good job at embracing the technology. We are altering our services. We are building our own models for doing quality evaluations and doing post-editing and content creation. We're using it internally robustly. A couple of great examples. Our dev organization is using LLM for 90% of their code reviews. And that's awesome. Developers hate doing code reviews. And what Satya said in the very early days about the release of Copilot is taking the drudgery out of work. And I actually really believe that's important. It's help desk in our IT organization. 35% of our L1 tickets are being resolved through an agent. And again, that allows the rest of the tech team to be able to focus on problems and put more time into the hard things. We're using it. Product organization is using it to build epics. It actually does a really good job at epics and stories because you get some standardizations. Like, it's really easy to forget about logging events when you're building stories, and it'll
remind you of that.
It'll remind you of that, so you get it in there. So it's we're using it inside of our production environment, where you're using AI to do resource selection. We have a database that we send work to that includes over 200,000 resources, and instead of a PM having to do that, so it's pervasive throughout our company. And then even also one of the theories we had is like things are going to get more and more narrow. The techs allow us to become more and more specialized, and so we bought a MarTech company that we can integrate into other MarTech stacks like AEM, and building and basically charging out the problem and saying, okay, marketing operations manager, we're going to put the ability for you to create global campaigns on your desktop without you ever having to leave Marketo or ever having to leave Eloqua. And then we wire in our services for mostly quality evaluation on the backside, so that they can do that in a comfortable and confident way. By doing that, they can probably produce more personalized campaigns. They could possibly enter more markets, and they can do it faster. And faster and more leads to potentially better outcomes for them.
So maybe talk to me a little bit about, it sounds like you got good adoption internally. I mean, it's you created a environment of innovation. You tried to take away some of the fear of new technology and change. Talk to me about the other side of it. Like, do you have like a traditional customer early adoption curve, and then basically people asking a lot of questions, and then people starting to create initiatives? You hear a lot of this where I think there's a lot of tinkering going on in the enterprise, but I'm not sure that like wholesale changes are there yet. And so I'm curious on, you're building all these solutions, you've got your your team aligned. I'm sure there's some early adopters, but what's the rest of the market kind of telling you?
A good portion of our business is servicing tech companies, and so that's going to be biased towards early adoption.
Early adopters, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and so our business, we have tech companies that we service. We have a legal services company. I'm seeing less adoption there, but there is awareness that's developing. And then we have a part of our business that services life sciences, med devices, and things like that. And that's heavily under regulation. That is going to probably slow the adoption of the tech. Inside of tech services and manufacturing type customers, absolutely. I mean, they are looking at implementing, going, moving away from using MT in very selective areas to moving towards a world where we want to MT all of our content, but we need to have the tooling in place to give us assurance that it's not going to, if you're using LMs or if you're using MTs, that we aren't creating egregious content. And so it's like a lot of our development has been more on the risk assurance side. There's a great MT development tech out there, and the LMs are the LMs. We're using both models and technologies, but where we're focusing and the problem we're solving is, okay, companies, you're going to embrace this. We need to give you risk assurance that you can expand and your global footprint, your global content without creating any additional risk. So in our experience, like I said, we ran to it. Our customers are running to it, and it's pervasive. And so far, I think, I do think, I think early days we were definitely in front of it compared to our competitors and our peers. I think it's a little bit more level now, and and I see this in all content services out there, that anybody who's in a content service environment has to be embracing this and developing business strategy around it.
So what about the people? I mean, I guess what all the examples you gave me, whether it's like code reviews or help desk tickets or other functionality and initiatives you're doing, that requires definitely a co-pilot. It's not a standalone application at all. And then it really is starting to take away some of the drudgery that you talked about from the employee, but there's a kind of a level up kind of a scenario to go do. And so is there any concern with the employees, or like the way that you're thinking about, like saying, okay, the bottom 10% is what you're doing, I need another 10% that's above what you're doing, and how do you kind of train to adapt to that?
Yeah, it's delicate, right?
Yeah, I imagine it's hard change management.
It's I think in even with my own kids who are newly into the workforce, is understanding in terms of the topical areas that are working, and understanding how to use this technology in innovative ways to create differentiation, to create productivity. And I don't think full functions are going to be removed, but I think that the developer who is resisting using it for code review, well, they're 10% less efficient. They could be using this, and so and that's change management. I can't say that we're 100% change management, but it is just constantly working with teams and functions out there of how to leverage the technology. And then I think you have to I think it has to be positioned as from that drudgery standpoint. We want you to focus your time on things that you're skilled for, solving whatever problem it is, whether it's developing, whether it's accounting, whether it's project management and customer engagement and customer solutions, and get away. Let the tools get rid of all the admin work.
Do you find that personally for you? Like, I mean, do you find like you can get rid of 10% of the drudgery work of the day-to-day job for you? Or do you think like the tech's not there to actually do most of that yet? Or does that go back to your virtual assistant concept that's coming?
So this is terrible. Like just from a research standpoint, or let's say there's a long email thread. I might cut and paste the whole thing into our internal version of GPT. You can give me a summary. I'm really lazy on that stuff. If there's articles and papers, I use it a lot for getting summarizations. If I'm, having to write content, I will often start with it to give me some starter stuff. And so I don't know if that's 10%, but I do use it for my own productivity. I've really tried to use the different toolings for PowerPoints, and those don't seem to be very good yet. But that would actually, I would kill it if there was a good PowerPoint tool.
No question from that standpoint. Yeah. Well, good. So maybe like the next piece of this we can kind of pivot to is maybe some of the framework that we've been talking about. I think one of the needs, I guess, we've heard from our kind of entrepreneurs that we've been working with is there's so much noise about technology and how big these models are and what they can't do. But I think what's lacking a little bit is maybe just more of a functional product strategy approach to entrepreneurs and business leaders trying to figure out like how to apply this. And I feel like it's overwhelming, especially if you're not a technical founder. You're kind of sifting through a lot of this. It's changing quickly. And so maybe I can just kind of walk through kind of each one of these that we kind of think about and see what your comments are, because I think this is going to change over time. And we're kind of in what we're calling right now kind of the AI co-pilot model, right? Where it is kind of what Microsoft is doing a little bit. It's basically 80% human, and then you're basically leveraging the best of AI. And I think like Word's a great example of it. Some of the applications there where it's looking and trying to make you better. I think the development and code review is a great example. They can't replace anybody, but it seems like that's where most of the high-end use cases or high-value use cases are today.
Yep.
Any feedback or comments on like that piece of it? And basically from your perspective, you think most of the application for you is in that first bucket?
Right now, I think it is, but I think we're moving fairly fast to a pivot to being having to be able to deliver certain services that are going to be more AI based, and it's the human that's then doing the eval on it. In terms of the tech itself, also as we're staring down our own tech strategies, it's one thing I have realized and have been working with our own dev org is we can't be too tied to any one of these technologies out there. Like we have a problem that we're trying to solve, let's design something to solve that problem, but we have to exist in a reality that this tech could change significantly in 12 months or 6 months. Yep. And it's like the AI is kind of like the little utility company that we need to plug into to get fuel. But our emphasis is we still have to think about what's the problem we're solving, and we don't want to be too roped in too tightly with any one of the AIs out there. And so in our own modeling, we build model gardens, and we're using OpenAI, we're using Anthropic, we're using different models, and so there's a lot of diversity there.
So what does that mean practically, though? Is that just making sure that you have an API structure? You're not doing anything that's basically tied to one of these, LLMs, and so you're basically having to design for what the lowest common denominator from an integration and feature set is. Ideally,
and also to keep things very, very simple. And so instead of building really big stacks, think very much in terms of more simplified components, and that then we can rearrange and reorganize as the technology is evolving.
Okay. So maybe the next component of this that we are kind of thinking about is more the standalone AI, bot, basically that's single threaded. It could go do something functionally for you and then return something. And so again, it's probably 80% the AI in that case and 20% you. And so do you have any use cases, or do you see that coming relatively soon, or do you feel like that's going to take some time?
Well, I mean, in our very, very specific use case, like language and language translation and anything content wise, I think that path is happening. And in some cases today, we are seeing where we will produce content, different types of content, and 80% of that content is produced through AI, and then we have an evaluation that is somewhere between 10 and 20% of the combined effort. So I think as companies are building models to perform specific tasks, and there's still also how do you best train the models? Are you going to pick something up like Llama and fine tune it? Are you going to apply RAG strategies, which seems to be getting more and more popular? And I think now I've seen more recently where companies are thinking, how can I build my own models and have some sort of efficient training mechanism, and now I can apply it to very specific tasks inside my business or very specific service for someone. And then so I think that the whole aspect of and training's like we struggle with this as well. Like there's a training methodology, and that seems to be getting better and more sophisticated or more mature. But you're still sort of also dependent upon the quality of your data that you're going to use to train, and that's no joke. And so like I think they're getting to a world where you need less and less data. But you still have to have high quality data, and that data pipe has to be something that is consistent and efficient in order to get most out of those models you're using, whether that's for an internal application or a product.
So maybe two questions on that, and maybe this is the wrong analogy, but it feels like, if you look at a large LLM like ChatGPT, it's a Swiss Army knife. It's meant to do a lot of different things. It's not optimized for any. And then I think what you're talking about is as you have more and more specific use cases, can you either build your own or optimize your own specifically for that? And it's not going to do all the Swiss Army knife type things that you need to go do, but it'll do that specifically. Okay, so that's one. Seems like we're on board, same page on that one. The second one is you talked about kind of an 80-20 type of philosophy with today having these kind of bots basically do something that's very specific. What is we hear a fair amount about hallucination. I think we've all seen examples of that. How real in like a business application standpoint is it? Is that really what you're really looking for in this 10 to 20% overview to make sure that that's not sneaking through and really contaminating the final product?
Yeah, and it is very real. We have developed some customer service bots for specific engagement models inside of our portal, and I've resisted actually releasing those to production because the hallucination scares me. And I think with over time, I think hallucination will be offset by better training and tuning, or at least reduce the risk. And you can also use things like our own quality evaluation tooling, which is using an AI model. And we could apply a couple of different ones that's going to diminish and decrease the risk to a point that I think if you that quality evaluation model of output content, we're training that inside of the basic topical area of the input content. You get pretty close. You get pretty comfortable. We aren't removing the human. We still want a human evaluation because this is commercial content that's getting exposed. But I think over time it's going to get better and better and de-risk the hallucination, because those don't seem like they're going to go away by the probabilistic nature of how the technology works.
So there's no relationship to the amount of hallucination or the variety of hallucination if it's a full-blown language model versus a standalone specific model that's very task-specific?
I think it's the specific model you have less risk because it's designated to perform. Yeah, yep. I don't know the science behind it, but I would have to ask our own ML team. But that would be task specific because you are tuning it and training it to perform a specific outcome.
Yeah,
and same with like we're doing multilingual models. We tune it and train it for marketing content for Wildfire Labs, and we'll have all of Wildfire's corpus in there. It's going to produce a better outcome.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, the third tier that we're looking at that I think lots of people are interested and excited about is what if there's more of these independent AI agents that are running around and they start to mesh, right? And so they're starting to communicate on their behalf. And so, I mean, one of the real world, examples that I have is just travel, business travel in particular, right? It's like I had a flight a little while ago that basically I was on the East Coast coming back and the flight was canceled. And so basically I missed a lot of things, right? So basically my hotel needed to be rescheduled. I had an Uber scheduled. I had dinner with a partner scheduled. I had a whole bunch of things that I had to basically reschedule. And so if you could basically start with the genesis of that said, all right, I saw your Delta flight got canceled, and then I look at all the dependencies that you had beyond that, and I can change all those things, and you can give me a little bit of prompts to say, hey, call that partner and see if dinner is available for tomorrow night. Here's the new flight information. But like the integration, the trust, the access to my data to do Marriott app, the Open Table app, the Delta app, the Uber app, like it's got to be all connected. And so I don't know if you feel like over time we're going to get to more of these things where you've got independent agents that are doing things, but then have the ability to talk to each other and share information.
I think it's frightening for a lot of people, right? Because they also lose control. You have some third-party tech developer out there that it's not just the app itself, or maybe you have a localized version that you can control. But I would love that world. I was thinking,
how many times this has happened to us?
Yeah, I'll give access to those different services, as well as my calendar and my email, and and tell me when to go ahead and schedule the servicing on my car. Remind me to go do a dentist appointment. You can see in my calendar what to put in there. I mean, in the travel example is great. I would embrace that, but I don't have a whole lot of exciting stuff to hide either. So it's pretty good. I'm okay with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's how far do you think that is away? Like, how far do you think not super complex like what we just talked about for maybe the travel scenario, but like your dentist one should be relatively easy, right? It's a standalone bot. It's that like every 6 months you need your teeth cleaned. I've got access to your calendar. If the dentist office and the scheduling app that they're using has an API, you'd think that that's relatively easy.
I think I've seen a couple of startups like going down this road, and I would bet there's something sort of useful, in the next year. Because it's there, right? It's like, and particularly with 4.0 and the multimodality of it, I can talk to it in a very natural way, and so I don't have any barrier to entry. It's just, and so it's all plausible. It'll just be a matter of the API connections and access to your data.
So let's maybe talk about some real world examples. I mean, we kind of talked about this framework of going from something that's super simple, Copilot, to something that could be way more complex with like an AI agent mesh. If you kind of apply some of the companies that we know, the big tech companies, Microsoft is an example where it seems like they're all in on this Copilot model, right? They were pretty early. They partnered with OpenAI, and now they're trying to integrate it basically with Office, with their developer tools, enterprise applications. And so it seems like they're seeing that as an opportunity. You're a user of some of their services, and you were just talking about, even before we got on, that basically the version control and the up-to-dateness or the newest versions are lagging. And so you've got kind of ones that are in Azure and in that environment, and then you've got API ones that you're running independently that has the latest and greatest. And so I'm just kind of curious about how do you guys think about that from a tech stack development standpoint? And do you feel like the safety that Microsoft provides by maybe not being on the bleeding edge is worth the consistency and productivity that you get versus maybe the new features that you're doing directly API?
Yeah, I mean, contractually, the enterprise licensing for OpenAI also, has protections in place in terms of the privatization of your data. So we use OpenAI and APIs for certain modeling and certain tasks. Our corporate applications of AI, and so that's everything from the product organization is using or project managers are using. That's all using inside of the umbrella of Microsoft and the OpenAI instance inside of our Microsoft enterprise environment. So my assumption is that OpenAI is probably okay, but from a usability, a use case standpoint, and accessibility from a company standpoint, Microsoft is packaging it in such a way that it's very easy to deploy across the enterprise. And so to get to the worker change management and opportunity with that, whatever version we're using internally, I think it's 3.5. It's good enough for those applications.
What I heard, maybe I'll just read between the lines a little bit. It just seems like the data sensitivity is driving a lot of the decision making. So privacy of your data. So I don't want it back in the model. I don't want it being, fed back in. Basically, that's driving kind of the business decision about where and what I use when. And so you can be on the cutting edge, but then you don't have control of your data. If it's internal stuff, I'm going to go through the environment with the protections that they provide.
Yeah, absolutely. And also we're processing a lot of data and content downstream from our customers. So we have to do, everything possible to maintain assurances of what we're doing with that. And so it's always inside of our Microsoft environment.
Yep, makes sense. So let's maybe talk about Apple next. I mean, Apple came out, fairly recently with kind of Apple Intelligence, and so that's their AI component of it. They are building their own small language models that will be on the phone, as well as partnering, at least to start with OpenAI. But it seems like they're kind of making that an open marketplace where, just like with search, you can plug in whatever search engine you want. I think this is probably, from their standpoint, pretty smart, where it's like saying, I know the individual tasks that you can do on your iPhone, and so I'm going to localize those, and I'm going to really focus on your data protection and privacy, and that data is not going to leave the device. And when you do decide to punch out to any one of these third parties, we're going to be super clear about you're leaving the Apple ecosystem, you're going to somebody else's, and your data privacy is not protected. And so I'm curious. I mean, I think it's just kind of interesting how they're doing it. And it seems like as they see more and more of these punch outs and more of these user scenarios, the next version of it's going to have more localized models that take more and more of that off and basically build it locally. I don't know if you see it the same way or not.
It's the digital assistant, right?
It is. I mean,
it's like they are the best positioned to, being able to introduce a daily production grade digital assistant. I mean, it's even the little things now. It's like it knows every day I go to the gym at 3:45 and it pops up and says it's about approximately 13 minutes. So it's already has all my data. And so just unleash it and make it even more usable. But I think absolutely. And then inside of the localized model on my phone, the scariness of releasing my personal data is kind of removed because it's already in an environment that I've become comfortable with.
What'll be interesting there too is like how quickly do they open some of those smaller language models to developers, right? Where it's like the same constraints, but now basically everybody else that's got an app on it can leverage some of those. And how much of that is really relevant? It'll be interesting to see. I have no idea. I mean, you can think about all the apps that are on your phone, and are there genericized small language models that are local that are available to help those apps to be enriched or not? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
Or do you have you do have your local model on your phone, but you have some sort of GPT-like tooling and instrumentation where
toolkit essentially.
Exactly, and I can
SDK.
sell, and I could as a developer, I'm not going to put a new model on your phone, but I'll sell you a GPT that can perform certain actions or activities on the phone.
And so kind of getting back to like how they make their money, right? They're a hardware company, and really they're stressing privacy, and you can see that their AI strategy is leaning into that hard. The flip side of that one is probably Android, right? And so Google, right? Where it's like saying their primary way to make money is search, and I need your data. I need you to participate this. And so I would guess that they're going to have some element that's similar, where it's like, from a latency standpoint, it's probably more of it, where it's like performance-wise, I'll do small language models, but your data could leave the phone in any case because we're going to use it for search. And then there's probably going to be Gemini punch-outs for it, just like they have today. But basically, privacy is not your issue, and it's going to be really the whole business model is geared towards the search component of it.
Yeah, I think because that's what their revenue is, and so then it's how it'd be interesting to think about is like how, because right now on our iPhones we use Chrome and search all the time, and so they're integrated well, and there's usability and feature sets to support that. And so now if I have a digital agent, my Apple digital agent, I'm still going to use search because it still is best of breed. It'll be interesting to see how they combine or modify that new sort of ecosystem out there, how they're going to interoperate with each other. Because I want the advantages of search, right? And I I like where Gemini's going in terms of giving me all the reference content. It's giving me a pre-prepared thing. It's not perfect, but I like the concepts that are being presented. And now if my digital agent can actually execute those searches and just give me the summarization or something, I mean, there's potentially interesting UX out there.
Do you think this drives a wedge in this kind of iPhone versus Android model, or you think it's all right? The lines have already been drawn. You've picked your camp, and you're good to go. The reason I ask is I think that the model that Google is having with Android and the assets that they probably have way more flexibility to solve interesting problems if data privacy isn't your major concern. Whereas Apple, because of their privacy and what they've done, they're going to have some constraints on all the different problems they can go solve.
Well, I think also that inside of the Android environment, there's greater opportunity for innovation. Where inside of a walled garden like Apple, the innovation is only from Apple or largely limited to Apple. Where Google can sit there and it's released it out into the wild, and it can be observing all the different innovations that are occurring, and so that might accelerate interesting applications.
Yeah, and so it'll be interesting to see if they end up getting any sort of market share. Which maybe to pivot from a market share standpoint of just talking about Europe, right? So maybe the tagline on this one is, Apple, with all their Apple Intelligence and their AI features, has basically said we're not going to release this in Europe. And there's a lot of regulation, GDPR and others, that basically have restricted their ability to innovate in that space because of the legal regulatory issues there. And so, do you see over time a less innovative, less functioning iPhone that basically is popular in the European market?
I think, with GDPR and the Digital Marketing Act and the sort of continuation of legislative privacy and data protections, it's not just Europe also. It's like India has created some laws and different markets around the world. But I do think it's going to slow down the pace of innovation, or at least the adopted innovation by the consumer out there or the business out there. And so, yeah, but at the same time, it's we're so global. Like we have a large presence in China, and where there's restrictions on a lot of softwares like Google and Facebook's. Our teams see it every day. I mean, or they know what's out there. They're still using the legal softwares inside of China, but I don't know how long you can sort of holster that innovation and accessibility. In certain countries, it's going to be more successful, but in Europe, I just don't know how long they can prevent access to certain interesting tech. And so,
I mean, for Apple, it's 10% of their total revenue, and I don't know, Google and their strategies probably doesn't really fit very well for them either. So I don't know. I think it's definitely going to put them behind from just an entrepreneurial innovation standpoint in the space, just because the regulatory environment is much more difficult.
Yeah, without doubt. This is interesting. Also, we've been investing heavily into our AI ML development team, and we have, without a doubt, found more talent in the United States than we have in other parts of the world, where we have offices. That we have a large dev organization in Barcelona and a growing dev organization in India. But I mean, to your point, where the United States does seem to be in front of the curve in terms of building this innovation, as well as the talent associated. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't great innovation like Mistral taking place in Europe, but I think the interference with government is going to not be to the benefit of those countries trying to develop innovative centers.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just an interesting topic, and it'll be interesting to see how it continues to play out. But it'll be an interesting time. So maybe pivoting a little bit back to like the entrepreneur, if you were starting a company today and you knew that you had a good use case and it could involve API, or it can include AI. How do you think about it, right? You can't, and maybe this goes back to the way you're thinking about your tech stack today, where you're basically doing to standards, you're not marrying yourself to one application, really API first type of mentality. Are there other things that you think entrepreneurs should really think about as they're trying to build their first MVP, right? We're not trying to build the Taj Mahal here. We're trying to basically solve a real world use case and see if there's a market for it.
Yeah, I think one, trying to build as little tech as possible and use what's out there. Because I think inside of some of these evolving technologies, you'll run into tech debt fairly fast. I think it is really important to deeply understand the problem you're trying to solve, and then look for a solution to solve that. And that should be a composition of roll your own tech, other services out there, and just make sure it's done in an agile enough way that the next aha moment we have 6 months from now, you can quickly pivot. And so, like I said, for some of our own instrumentation, we're calling it, a model garden. So we're using 3 different models to perform similar tasks. That's great for research, and but it also allows us to have a little bit of agility and nimbleness as to how these and figure out what models are best for what types of tasks out there. And so, but understanding the problem, and even for us, like this, we've moved into this marketing tech. We found, after doing customer research, what's really, really important to the customers we're trying to sell to is easy. They don't want to have to learn new software. They don't want to have to learn new UIs. And so we're giving them an enterprise grade software, but they never have to leave their home base. And so, we give them a simple plug-in to Chrome, and it punches out, and it will start an AI workflow for them. And so
that's pretty slick.
The customer never leaves, where they're comfortable. And I see more and more stuff like that happening, because we want things to be easy, and we have more and more work. So I don't want to have to learn new things. And if I can't solve it with ChatGPT, then I'm not interested.
So would you say, back to the kind of the entrepreneur piece of it, start with kind of these large language models, plug them in to solve the specific problem, even if it's overkill, right? Where it's like you didn't have to build anything. And then basically, as you get more and more data, then look at localized models that maybe are more specific tuned for your problem specifically. And the investment's there, but you've already identified there's a demand for it. And so go generic to start with, and then over time get more specific and a higher degree of ownership.
Yeah, because I think the differentiation in the USP is going to be inside of that specialization. And we can, and you can do that in terms of multiple specific solutions inside of one topical area or functional area. Or, you could have a similar, like we're actually going more horizontal. So like we have a translation service that we'll use with AI, but we can persist that across different verticals. But each vertical we go into, we want it to be very, very customized to that particular vertical. So if a marketing operations manager is doing translations, they use certain words and they think and talk in a certain way. If a paralegal is doing translations, they have a different user experience, but they all also have kind of their home-based systems, and we want to keep them inside of their home-based system, but have access to these services, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So maybe towards the end here, Chris, like I'd almost take the bear case. I shared with you, I think it was a Goldman Sachs, article or like a PowerPoint on, is there really a benefit to all this long term? I think a lot of it is talking about maybe it's $1 trillion to build out all this infrastructure, and do we really have $1 billion ROI that's really behind this? And so, and I think, and as I think part of the innovation curve has maybe slowed down a little bit in the last 18 months. Like, from the 18 months, it was like bam, bam, bam. Maybe the last 6 months aren't as materially changing. We're talking about 5.0 at some point in time and what that's going to do. But I'm curious, like from the bear case standpoint, do you feel like we're in early innings? And then, like, how do you think about this? It sounds like in your own business, you're finding lots of low-hanging fruit to go continue to do. And you drew a parallel that you were talking about even just like when you first got on the internet.
Yeah, I do think it's early innings. And I think there's actually, I've read through those reports, and, they're looking for these home runs. And I think just like with email, it wasn't necessarily email in the 90s. It made it easier to communicate with people. I didn't have to fax. I didn't have to call someone. And I think as companies get comfortable with the tech, I think one of the big things also is like it's taken a while for people to have trust in it. And so once you have trust in the technology, then you can start looking for applications. And I think last I checked, we have 22 different applications in our business of using AI models to improve. Now, not one of them is leading to something that's going to show up on our P&L. But the accumulation of them I do have deep confidence that it's making us more productive. It's improving some work jobs out there. And it's only now, once we start applying this tech into our day-to-day work, we start getting better and better ideas as to what this could do. For maybe we get a triple at some point next year as to where this could be improved. So I think so. The $1.5 trillion investment, I mean, I guess that's beyond my pay grade. It's like, it's it's out there. It's being used. I don't see how it's bearish, because it's just, look, I mean, and even if you look at OpenAI's licensing, what they have, like, I mean, the pickup, they have 100 million or 200 million users. I mean, there's a good percentage of those people that are using it for productive ways every day of their life. So, and does the accumulation of that benefit equal that investment? And so, I don't know.
So far, it does for you, which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so, do you think there's a 10 to 15% efficiency in your organization for those 22 different AI applications? Do you think it's more or less than that?
I don't know. I bet it's close to that. And I think as it becomes more standard procedure, part of our tech stack, part of our digital experience inside of the company, and we're using it in more and more areas, I think, if we aren't at 10 to 15% now, we will be very shortly. And then I think we'll only accelerate from there as it persists across the organization. So
that's pretty cool. That's good.
I've talked to some of our data people. I know they're writing a ton of SQL with it. I was talking to a kid who was in a data science program, and he had to take a course in R, and or he had a couple of courses in R. He chose not to take the second one because he knew enough of it from the first one that now he can just use OpenAI. And so, I mean, it's all sorts of different applications of it, right?
Yeah. Well, good, Chris. Well, I think, we've used up 52 minutes. I would like to leave some time for some Q&A. I think this has been really good. It's been kind of a romp. And, honestly, I guess the thing I would say thank you the most for is just being honest about kind of what you're doing in the application of your own business. I think you saw this as a change agent. I think you embraced it. You tried to find different areas. We're still in early innings, but I think the real practical application of this has been probably some of the most interesting part of the conversation, at least for me. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mike?
All right, guys, great discussion. I enjoyed all of that. So thank you for sharing your experience, Chris, and for you asking the tough questions. But there's more tough questions, Chris. So you are an incumbent. You're an incumbent who's also a disruptor. So I would like to hear your advice for early stage startups that are resource poor. How can they compete with the resource rich incumbents using AI? What's your advice to them?
I think about this a lot as an incumbent, because an incumbent has to think about like a disruptor, because the disruptors can come in and just undercut you. And incumbents now, we're resource rich, but we're slow as shit. It's just like it's just a fact. I mean, it's like releasing technology to our production environment. It just takes a long time because of obligations and responsibilities, and so we can't be as innovative as I would like to be conceptually. And so I think as a startup, going back to that problem you're solving, the more specific that, and then you can also align the solution that you're producing to an outcome, even if but a very specific outcome, you can get opportunity inside of an incumbent like us. We are looking at a variety of techs, and we use a variety of techs that come from smaller companies and early stage companies, because we aren't going to have an early stage company replace Workday for us, but we're looking for a very specific point solution. We'll look at across the spectrum of companies out there.
So get focused and add a ton of value in a narrow area is what you worry about.
Yep.
Okay, I like it.
Our strategy as well is we're trying to take a similar strategy, understanding that the tech allows us to be more specialized and verticalized.
All right, so Todd, I want you to take a crack at this one. What would you tell non-technical founders to focus on when they think about pushing AI into their product strategy?
I think it's probably twofold. I think some of this is what we've already talked about, but one of them is just tinker, man. I think like spend time doing what Chris has talked about, right? Where it's like everything you can think about, try it, right? Try conversations with it. Try to understand the boundaries of it, where it's helpful, where it isn't helpful. And I think don't treat it like a search engine, right? I think so many people get turned off where it's like, this sucks. It's not like Google. And you're like, oh, okay, but it's not solving the same problem as Google either. And so I do think that the more I've fiddled with it, tried different things, had success, have not had success, I've been amazed at like just the plethora of ideas and ways you could go use it. I write every week. And so even just trying to clarify my own thinking, and it's like having somebody like Chris to talk to and bounce ideas off of it and come back and say, is this sharp enough? Does this make sense? What would the next logical piece to you? Like those types of conversations, I think entrepreneurs should be doing all the time. And they should first think about like everything from logo design to, how I'm communicating. Like if they start thinking about that for their own business, that curiosity, I think, will carry them a long way. The second piece to it is kind of what Chris was talking about like how to leverage these models. Is there's Swiss Army knife and there's an API with it. And so if you start with this and you kind of understand some of the opportunities and limitations to it, and you're trying to use and find ways to API into it and solve your problem better, I think those are two things functionally you can really go do well. Chris, would you add anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I can't emphasize the tinkering. You can't treat it like technology, actually. You kind of got to treat it like the digital assistant, because it takes you build a skill set around prompting and the refinement of your prompts, and the more you pursue like a particular thread, what I've learned, the outcome gets much better. But now I've actually kind of retrained myself as to how to become a better prompter, and that's a real thing.
We see that too in our cohorts, that when you have founders who are trying things, sharing that knowledge and figuring out what works is a really interesting way to innovate. I know you guys have done that together. So, all right, last question. This is a chicken and the egg question. Do you start with the problem and try to find an AI to solve the problem, or do you start with what AI can do in your tinkering and then try to go solve problems knowing what AI can do? So, Chris, I'll let you start with that one, and then Todd shake his head already. So
yeah.
So Todd, you get first crack because you're shaking your head. So go ahead, Todd, and then we'll have.
Well, I always think with entrepreneurs, like, right, we say, what problem are you solving, right? It's always the problem. What problem are you trying to solve, right? If you're looking for AI and saying what problem to go solve, it's a little bit of a whack-a-mole. I think you're trying to go find a real-world problem, understand it deeply, understand the customer scenario, understand the pain. What are they willing to go through to change it? And then is there an AI component that makes it better, right? It's not always the solution. I think we're in an area today where like it's not a black box. You just throw the problem at it and it solve it. But I think most of our entrepreneurs that we talk to, they don't understand the customer and they don't understand the problem set well enough. And I think it's a very dangerous thing to say, well, AI will figure this stuff out for me and I'll just add technology to it. So that'd be my 2 cents.
Chris.
Yeah. Like as an entrepreneur and I'm starting a business, I'm trying to make something that I can sell to someone, and they're only going to buy it if it's solving a problem or it's bringing value to them. And so I just believe wholeheartedly that you have to start with a problem, and then the outcome is what you're particularly getting paid for.
Yep.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience. That actually ties in nicely to the wrap up, and that if you are a founder on the webinar today, or you're listening to our podcast later, one of the key things that we dive into is how to map customer problems to what AI can do. So we are going to send all of you a copy of our AI product strategy white paper, and we love your feedback on how that maps to your challenges. Also wanted to remind you to subscribe to our Substack, where we have articles on this very topic that will dive into more details on exactly how you can turn your startup idea into an AI-driven startup idea. So thank you all for coming today. We appreciate your attendance, and thank you so much, Chris and Todd, for sharing your wisdom and experience. It's super valuable for the next generation of entrepreneurs to be thinking about this. So thank you all for attending, and have a great day.
If you enjoyed the podcast today, please just take a moment to rate it or comment on it for us. this feedback really helps us, and it helps us get the word out to like helping other entrepreneurs and founders. Thank you.